For the president to be so cavalier, to disregard, to be indifferent to law and any sense of ethics about who we are as a country, to say he would invite foreign intervention, that's an assault on our democracy.
All right, that was House Speaker Nancy Pelosi this morning reacting to the president's comments that his campaign might not contact the FBI if a foreign government reached out to help with electoral efforts. The speaker strongly condemned the president's answer in that interview, but stopped short of calling for impeachment. Watch this.
Everybody in the country should be totally appalled by what the president said last night. Should be totally appalled. But he has a habit of making appalling statements. This one borders on so totally unethical that he doesn't even realize it. However, what we want to do is have a methodical approach to the path that we are on, and this will be included in that.
And now more Republicans are weighing in.
What would you do, sir? Would you call the FBI? Would you call the FBI?
Would I call the FBI about what?
If somebody, a foreign adversary, called you and said, I have information on your opponent, would you call the FBI?
I would send it to the authorities, yes.
In circumstances where a foreign government attempts to be involved in an American election, that would be simply unthinkable for a candidate for president to accept that involvement, to encourage it, to participate with it in any way, shape, or form. It would strike at the very heart of our democracy.
All right, let's bring in independent Senator Angus King of Maine. Senator, thanks so much for joining us on this. You just heard Speaker Pelosi say we need a methodical approach to the path that we are on. Does that path, Senator, lead to impeachment?
Not necessarily. I think the Speaker has it exactly right. She's following a methodical, step-by-step process of bringing before the American people what the facts are of the situation. And I think that's exactly the way to go. What the president said last night was beyond astounding. An absolute fundamental bedrock of the founding of this country was a profound fear and suspicion and unease with foreign interference in our elections. The 68th Federalist, Hamilton, talked about it. There's a letter from Thomas Jefferson, from John Adams to Thomas Jefferson in December of 1787 on the same subject. The Constitution itself has this principle in it. The Emoluments Clause is all about prohibiting foreign gifts, anything of value to our officials. And for the president to have said what he said last night was not only a profound lack of understanding of our history and our system, but it was also just unbelievable in its indifference to what this country is all about, and basically saying if somebody from a foreign country, even if it's an adversary, wants to give me some information, hey, I'll take it, and I'm not going to call the FBI. That's outrageous, and it like I say, it just goes to the very basis of who we are as a country. Even George Washington, in his farewell address, warned about foreign interference. There are foreign countries that would love to get their fingers into our elections. In fact, the Russians did it in 2016, and the president last night invited it in 2020.
So what is the tipping point then for you, Senator, especially after hearing the president's comments last night and hearing Nancy Pelosi's approach to impeachment proceedings?
Well, I think we've got to take this step by step. I mean, the fact is, an impeachment proceeding would just totally divide the country right now. There's a loyal base of 35 or 40% of the people that no matter what comes out, they're not going to support pushing this president out of office. The other reality is if the House impeached, the matter is tried before the United States Senate, which would take 20 Republican votes if all of the Democrats plus the 2 independents voted for impeachment. That's just not going to happen, at least not under what we know now. Now, if the president keeps saying and doing things like he talked about last night, that may change. I think you have to always say circumstances can change. But right now, I think what we would have would be a very divisive 6 or 8 months, unsuccessful trial in the Senate in terms of voting for impeachment. The president would act like he was the victim and talk about how the Democrats are just trying to play politics, and he would be running in 2020. I think the way to change this regime is through the election of 2020. That's the best check that the people have. And we're now, not all that far from that election, about 18 months. That's where I think that the change should take place.
Senator, I want to quickly ask you about the president's son testifying before your committee's House counterpart yesterday. Anything that you can share from us that you know of that testimony from yesterday?
No. I was at that hearing for 3 hours, but it was a closed hearing, and I don't comment on material that takes place in those kinds of classified settings. So I'm sorry. Your job is to ask the question. My job in this case is to not answer it.
Are you confident in the president's son's testimony from yesterday?
I'm not going to answer that question. I appreciate your
Okay,
asking,
fair enough.
and if you want to take another run at it, I'll give you the same answer.
All right, fair enough, Senator. Very much appreciate it. Jumping off of what the president said yesterday, how do lawmakers prepare for a 2020 election? How do you protect this country, really, this democracy, this election process in the 2020 election, considering what we heard from the president in that interview?
Well, we've been worried about the 2020 election ever since we figured out what happened in 2016. What the president said last night basically multiplies the problem. He essentially invited participation by foreign countries, even adversaries. We know that the Russians were engaged in a very active way and very systematic way in 2016. We know they're preparing to do so again in 2020. But last night he invited the whole world. Why not the Iranians or the Chinese or the North Koreans to mess around in our election, to provide information and help? And by the way, he acted like, oh, well, it's just information. Information in the sense of what the Russians did is power, it's influence, it's meddling, it has a value. And to invite that, I think, really ramps up what we have to do in order to protect ourselves. I'm working on a cyber commission to try to protect ourselves in cyberspace. But what the president said last night, as I say, really ratcheted up the pressure on the election of 2020. And this is the same president who says, I don't need any help. I won by myself. The Russians didn't help me. Nobody helped me. Well, if he doesn't need help from foreign countries, why did he invite it last night?
Senator, I quickly want you to comment on what's happening in the Middle East. As we well know, there was an attack of oil tankers this morning. Iran said that they were not responsible for this attack. We're still awaiting a response from the White House on who they may feel is responsible for an attack like this. But we do know, and we have been seeing what has been happening with Iran with regards to the sanctions that have been leveled against that country and the ratcheting up of what's been taking place, not only in the Gulf, but in the Strait of Hormuz, or outside of the Strait of Hormuz. What do you make of the situation right now overseas in Iran?
It's deeply concerning, Yasmin, and I'll tell you what worries me the most of all is an accidental confrontation that leads to escalation. We don't know what happened to those tankers. I have no inside knowledge, no classified information. All we know is that they were attacked. It would seem illogical if it was Iran, because one of those tankers was on its way to Japan. The Prime Minister of Japan is in Iran, or will be in Iran in the next couple of days. But we just don't know. But here's what...
So you don't necessarily think that Iran would be responsible for an attack like this? You don't know how you could make sense of it, is what you're saying?
At first blush, it doesn't seem logical for Iran to take a step like this. On the other hand, the situation is so volatile, and both we and Iran have been ratcheting up the rhetoric and doing things like moving troops around and moving missiles around. That's what creates the great danger. And what worries me is there's no... As near as I can tell, there's no real direct communication between us and Iran to defuse a situation that could lead to a kind of misperception, misunderstanding, miscalculation that ends up with an escalation. And a war in Iran would be a catastrophic event. It would be very, it would not be anything simple or a few weeks or a few days. It would be a serious confrontation. And again, if you go back to the beginning of World War I, the guns of August, it was miscalculations and misunderstandings that led to a war that nobody could afterwards say, why are we doing this? Why did this war start? And that's what's worrying me right now. And the tankers incident, who knows where that came from? It could be Iran, but it also could be somebody who wants to provoke us to attack Iran. So I think we need to get to the bottom of the facts before we decide what the policy response should be.
All right, Senator Angus King, thank you so much. Appreciate it, sir.
Thank you, Yasmin.